ICC UAE makes it possible. Founded in 1919, our mission is to make business work for everyone, every day, everywhere. The International Chamber of Commerce, United Arab Emirates.
Welcome to ICC UAE Business Brief, and today I'm joined by Dr. Hassan Arab, Chair, ICC UAE Commission on Arbitration and ADR, Mr. Ali Al-Aderis, former Chair, Commission on Arbitration and ADR, and Mr. Alan Farhad, Member, Commission of Arbitration and ADR. We are looking at a subject of increasing importance in the UAE and of importance to the growing number of investors looking to the UAE as a hub for trade and business. That subject is arbitration in the UAE. And not only that, but we will be looking at the forthcoming launch of a just completed book on arbitration in the UAE, recently published by the International Chamber of Commerce. First to Hassan Arab, Chair of the ICC UAE Commission on Arbitration and ADR. Hassan, can you set the scene by giving us some background on the work of the Arbitration Commission within ICC UAE?
Well, thank you, Vincent. Briefly, if we talk about the ICC UAE, it's the arm of the ICC International to promote the international arbitration in UAE and to promote the ICC arbitration as well. There are lots of objectives behind the steering committee of the ICC UAE. One of the objectives, as we said, is to promote the ICC arbitration, to encourage the young arbitration practitioner to participate and be an active member of the arbitration community. Also to support the ICC Commission, the global commission of the ICC, by participating in the task force. The other objective is to have initiatives, for example, conducting the training for the practitioner, seminars, and the books. We had previously, actually, during the previous steering committee time, we had two publications about the summaries of the court in UAE about the arbitration. And recently, during Mr. Ali Al-Aderis' time as the chair of the ICC UAE, we had the opportunity to publish the current arbitration book about certain topics related to arbitration in UAE. In addition to that, as I said, actually, the steering committee is an active committee to support the ICC Commission with the task force, for example, to review the ICC rules. So we nominate normally members of the steering committee to participate on those task force. Finally, the last point about the steering committee, we have within the steering committee a nomination committee. So when it comes to the arbitration seated in UAE, normally the Court of Arbitration of ICC will rely on us to nominate and recommend the practitioner to fit and act as an arbitrator for those arbitrations.
Very interesting, Hassan. Your commission is clearly making its mark in the UAE. The book, The Guide to Arbitration in the UAE, is quite an impressive publication, and its arrival on the scene in the UAE is very timely. Mr. Ali Al-Aderis was the original champion of this important work. So can I ask Ali about the background of the book and what inspired you to get underway and pull together such a strong team of contributors? What was the need, Ali?
As you know, UAE is the last nation in the region who ratified the New York Convention and also who introduced a standalone arbitration law. The arbitration practice has been developed for the last 2 decades or 3 decades. And that is, I believe, due to well-progressed court ruling that supported arbitration proceeding. Therefore, a task force was created by the previous commission, and they have published, as Mr. Hassan Arab mentioned, a publication 2013 and followed by 2017, focusing on providing excellent translation of these rulings that played a tremendous role and support to the arbitration community. In 2017, during my term as the chair of this commission, I suggested to build on this successful work, and therefore a task force has been has been created to provide a comprehensive guidance on arbitration in UAE by focusing on the law prevailing at that time and the case practice and the court practice. The task force, in my view, has contributed very well, and they work almost about to be published. Then the new law has came in force, promulgated by the country in late 2018, forcing the task force to revisit the entire work, to identify what's the new and what is the old concept that remain in the law. In my view, the task force has produced an excellent work that give a fair picture on and the features of the arbitration in UAE. I therefore take this opportunity to thank all the members, and I wish all the best for the future works. Thank you.
Ali, clearly a great success story of cooperation and engagement between active members of the ICC UAE, which is what the ICC is all about. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the business of the book itself. Can I turn to Alain and ask why this book is so important? What are the key ingredients that make it of value to the legal and the business community? Alain.
Thanks, Vincent. I think this book will be of interest to the increasing number of practitioners who have interest in the practice of arbitration in the UAE, to all those who practice in the UAE, but also the growing number of arbitration practitioners who work from abroad but have arbitration cases in the UAE. It is probably the first comprehensive book on arbitration in the UAE. And it is clearly the first such book since the implementation of the Federal Arbitration Law in 2018. In my view, Vincent, the publication of this book and its publication by the ICC is also reflective of the growing importance of the UAE for ICC arbitration and for international arbitration generally. The ICC's statistics, which are the most pertinent data we have to assess the development of international arbitration globally, show a clear rise in the popularity of the UAE as a venue for international arbitration proceedings. For example, in 2019, the ICC statistics show that the United Arab Emirates ranked 7th globally in terms of the numbers of arbitration seated in a country. So it was the 7th most popular country in the world for ICC arbitration. The UAE was also the preferred seat within the MENA region with 21 cases. So I do not know if you, Vincent, or others listening to us realize the achievement that this constitutes. When I first started the practice of international arbitration in Paris more than 15 years ago, the UAE was not very high on anyone's list for the most popular arbitration seats, but it now clearly is. A major milestone, in my view, was the UAE's adoption of the New York Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Awards in 2006. And a second very significant milestone was the adoption of the UAE Federal Arbitration Law in 2018. That law is based on the world's best practices. And so and the UAE has also this particularity, Vincent, that it offers parties to arbitration proceedings the choice of 3 different jurisdictions, 3 different arbitration legislations in one country. The UAE onshore, the DIFC, and ADGM, with each their own sophisticated modern arbitration legislation based on global best practices. So there is now also in the UAE a growing and increasingly sophisticated arbitration community composed of both Emirati nationals and expatriate lawyers of both civil and common law background, and who each contribute to the practice of international arbitration in the UAE, and who will all hopefully find interest in this book.
Alan, you have me totally convinced. I am not a lawyer, but as part of the ICC World Business Organization, I must also have this book on my bookshelf. Well, that's it for now. Our next video featuring arbitration in the UAE will look at some of the core chapters in the book, and we look forward to the launch of the book, which is planned for week commencing Sunday, 15th of November 2020. Thank you, my esteemed panelists, for your wonderful content in such a short period of time, and thank you, viewers, for your time and attention. Vincent O'Brien, ICC UAE Business Brief.
ICC UAE makes it possible.